Thank you. Opera. Entertainment for the elderly. A leftover from the 19th century. Boring, expensive, elitist. Perhaps the most elitist art form of all time. I am Lotte de Beer and I'm an opera director. And my slides have very little to do with my story. They're just pictures of productions, so don't let them disturb you too much. I am 34 years old, and if I would be, let's say, a soccer player, a ballerina, or a model, I would slowly be thinking about retiring. However, I work in the opera business, so I am considered very, very young, practically a baby. And that is why I've turned into this sort of ambassador for the rejuvenation of opera. I often get asked to talk in front of audiences of people, usually opera lovers, and I tell them about the importance of opera houses to find a younger audience, a more diverse audience, a broader audience. I tell them how opera needs the people. Today it is a bit different, I think, because I think it's safe to assume that most of you and most of the people who are going to watch this online have probably never ever been to an opera. Am I right? No? Oh, God. Okay. Well, I'll change my entire speech. No, I won't. I thought today, since there's a lot of young people, I shouldn't be talking about why the opera needs the people, but about why people actually need opera. Because even though there are so many opera lovers here, around the world, opera houses are doing everything. They're bending backwards to try to find you guys to buy opera tickets. They are printing glossy magazines, and they are getting sexy-looking singers on stage, and they are hosting red carpet events with VIPs and soap stars. And it's not really working if you see around the world who's actually attending it. It's pretty depressing. And then I heard another really depressing fact, that all the money that gets spent in advertising so that people will actually go to the opera can never be made back in ticket sales. So it seems like a really rotten business model, sort of, this opera. So I was actually, going in a downward spiral and thinking, should I do this talk? And I was sitting at the dinner table with my boyfriend's children, Maya and Jonathan, 12 and 14 years old, and they were suddenly getting really passionate. And they were passionate not so much because they love opera, but they absolutely wanted me to do this talk because they love TED Talks. Yeah. They said our entire school watches these talks constantly. They sit with their laptops in their rooms, and apparently they watch TED Talks. And that to me was very striking. Because I think, wow, you have these teenagers, and they have the World Wide Web. They could see everything. And they choose, this, just a person standing on a stage, telling a story, sharing a story with a community. They apparently don't go for the red carpet, sexy, multifaceted events. And I thought, well, that might have something to do with our time. It might be that we live in a 21st century where there's not a lot of time for sharing stories. I don't go to church on Sunday to get inspired with a sermon. We don't listen to big idealists who tell us how the world can be turned into a utopia, because it seems like generations before us have tried out those utopians and they didn't really succeed in that. And we respect each other so much that we've agreed that there's not one truth, but there's only several different opinions. And I think there's probably a big longing for people to hear those great stories told as if they are the truth, and to share experiences. And I think there's people also profiting from that. Populists, they're using those grand, almost operatic truths. It's very dangerous. And I think the opera could do a lot better and give it a positive swing. I think opera is a fantastic discipline. It has it all. It is a discipline that tells stories that are centuries old. These stories, they were written sometimes in the Renaissance, and we're still telling them because apparently there's something universal in them that still touches us. And then opera's music theater, music and theater, and it reaches us on different levels. It uses text, and it uses images. Of course, it uses music, which is most important. And texts go directly to our brain. They help us think, they pose questions, they maybe challenge our ideals. Images are very contemporary. If I want to put up an opera, I build a set on the day that I actually play the show, and afterwards we break it down again. So through image, we can get the associations of the audience of now and connect them to those universal truth in those stories. And then we have music. And music communicates in a most unique way. It reaches your soul directly, no detours. We don't know why that is, but when we hear a tune composed in 1850, I think biologically we have the same reaction as a person listening to that when the ink was still wet. Why is that? We don't know. Why can music make us feel sad or excited, or make us want to dance or shout or be scared? It's something that we can never really explain. It's abstract, but very accessible. And it needs no translation, it needs no explanation, it needs no updating. And I say if because I don't think we always succeed at it in the opera, but if we can take the strength of the music and we combine that with those great universal stories, and we use images to reach a contemporary audience, then opera is the best art discipline that I know. I'll give you another random picture. Yeah, it worked. Exactly. There's discussions in the opera world of how to treat these great stories. There are purists who say something written in the 19th century should look like the 19th century. You should do what the composer intended to do. Then there's other people who say, why do we need to tell those boring old stories again and again? Let us focus on writing something new. And for me, actually, the challenge of taking those sometimes really outdated stories and bringing them to today is invaluable. I think by looking at the past with the information that we have today, showing it and commenting on it might tell us something about our future. I'll give you an example. There is this fantastic opera by Mozart called Die Zauberflöte, the Magic Flute, and I will stage that in Vienna in a few years. And it's a bizarre story. It's like a fairy tale with a gazillion characters and storylines, and nobody really knows what it's about. Although people generally seem to think that it's about our Western civilization, about the enlightened Western civilization, about intellectual ideas and humanism. And I was reading through the uncut version of the texts. And usually you don't hear the uncut version because it's way too long and the music is divine, but the texts are slightly flawed. And I was shocked. It is so sexist and it is so racist. It has this character, a queen of the night, who is considered this evil bitch just because she's standing up for her most basic rights of raising her own daughter and being in charge of her own estate. And then there's this black slave called Monostatos, who gets slapped around a lot. They tell him he's evil and his soul is just as black as his skin, and he gets tortured. You know, the order for the torture gets given by this wonderful, enlightened white protagonist. And if you get a story like that as a stage director, you have to make a choice. Do I cut those sections out? It can be done. You know, I can make a version that hurts no one and still portray the piece. But I think it's maybe more interesting to actually thematize this racism and this sexism that is part of our society and that we can't look away from. So what I will do is I will make this Queen of the Night and this black slave Monostatos the protagonist of my piece, and everything that gets done gets looked at by these two people. And in that way, I think I can show that our wonderful, civilized Western society is actually drenched in sexism and racism and colonialism and whatnot. And by doing so, by sometimes sitting in an audience all together and having this intellectual workout, we might be able to speak in a more eloquent manner when we discuss current matters such as Zwarte Piet or Black Peter, which is going on in Holland right now. So by looking at our past in a way that we know things from the current situation, we might be able to change our future. I think that's the last picture. There's also a wonderful other thing in opera, and that is casting. Since singing and the voice is actually the first and the last thing that you think about when putting someone in a role, we get to see very different people on stage. There's a reason that we have this image of a really fat opera singer. It doesn't matter how she looks, it matters how she sounds. And that's why if someone can sing the part, it doesn't matter what the color of their skin is, if they're tall or if they're short, or if they're, you know, the standard beauty image that we have right now. And even though, unfortunately, opera houses think that in order to reach a younger audience, they have to look more like Hollywood, I think they're never actually gonna get there, and I think that's a great thing, because I think we deserve a place in society where falling in love, being a hero, living life, you know, dealing with death doesn't have anything to do with how we look. And that brings us to the last very important topic of opera, and that's the voice. The unamplified human voice, which communicates so much more than just words, text. I think singing is what comes after speaking is no longer sufficient to make a statement. And if you've never been, please go, because it's the most awesome experience that you can have. Somebody is tearing their soul out and reaching you with the sound, just natural, just live. And that is why, you know, even though people might not come anymore, even though opera might be based on the worst business model ever, even though, you know, if we go on like this, the regular audiences in 15 years will be dead, I am gonna keep making the plea to the world that in this very scary 21st century in which, you know, the person who screams the loudest seems to be getting the power, we might need just that, the human voice, live, unamplified, that moves us and that connects us and that brings us into connection with our deepest fears, that makes us think and makes us cry and makes us hope. And I think that is what opera can do, and that is why the world needs opera. Thank you very much.